Property investing is an excellent way to invest, and it's something I've been doing now for the last 20 years. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about single let foundations. But what is single let? Single let is where you rent your property out to one tenant. Now that one tenant might be an individual or it might be a small family, for example. Most of the properties that I rent out are small families. Now single let property investing is relatively straightforward, especially if you're organised. First of all, we're going to look at the buying process. Then we're going to be looking at finding a suitable tenant, the right tenant. Then it's about making your properties legal, which is very important. Moving on, we're going to look at managing your property, and finally networking with other property investors. Again, this is very important from my experience. The buying process. So first off, a good place to start is online, and look at sites like Rightmove or Zoopla. Look at properties that you fancy in your price range. My price range is normally 80,000 to 120,000. You might be similar, you might be much higher depending on where you are in the country. And then maybe go to your local estate agents, speak to your estate agent, and maybe get them to put you on their mailing list for suitable properties. So you start looking for properties, you find a few that you fancy, then it's about making some bids. Shot some bids in, you might get a few rejections, but eventually you'll get an offer accepted. So you're lucky enough to get an offer accepted. Now you have to make sure you get a mortgage product in place. Now I use a financial advisor. You can do it by yourself if you want, but my preference has always been to use a financial advisor. This is because my financial advisor helps me get a suitable product, and they've got access to the full range of mortgage products on the market. So my financial advisor will get me that mortgage product most suitable for me. Then once you've got the mortgage product in place, it's about getting surveyors involved, solicitors involved, getting to a point where you sign on the dotted line. So basically that's the buying process. Here's a quick summary. Go online and look for potential properties. Go to local estate agents and again look for potential properties. Maybe get your local estate agent to put you on the mailing list. Then it's about finding a property. Then agree on a price with your vendor. Then find a mortgage product either by yourself or with the help of a financial advisor. Then it's about getting surveyors involved, solicitors involved, and finally signing on the dotted line. Selecting your tenants. Now, one of my many mistakes as a property investor over the years is that I've sometimes rushed in getting a tenant. I've got the first person who shows any interest and got them in. So I'm not paying the mortgage, so I'm not paying the council tax. And this has been a mistake because it's normally led to questionable tenants. What you want to do is advertise and hopefully get a bit of interest. Once you've got a bit of interest, you can get all the potential tenants round on one given day and maybe get them in for viewings every 15 minutes, every 30 minutes, whatever it is. Now you can do this yourself, advertise on social media, Facebook, your local paper even, or you can go with your local estate agent, your letting agent. Now this is my preferred way to do it. I go over letting agent and they do all the suitable background checks, all the searches, make sure the tenant's suitable and they can afford the property. They can afford the monthly rent. Now I get the letting agent to find me a suitable tenant and then I look into the tenant myself. Maybe meet them in person, check the social media, check the Facebook, their Instagram. So for example, if they're a bit of a party animal, I might give them a wide berth. But if they look as though they're just a nice little family, for example, I'll probably side with them over the party animal. You get the point. Just be careful when you're selecting your tenant and don't do what I used to do in the past. Don't rush in. Fools rush in. So that's basically it. Find a tenant, You can do it yourself by advertising on social media and other methods, or you can do it through a letting agent. But again, don't rush in. Take your time, even if it's an extra few weeks, even a month or two. Finding that suitable tenant is massively important. You don't want a bad egg. You don't want a bad tenant. Make sure your properties are legal. This is massively important. And again, this is one of my old bad habits, or my old mistakes, should I say. My properties weren't always legal. There were times when my properties didn't have house insurance, or I didn't have a gas cert, for example, and this simply isn't good enough as a landlord or property investor. You need, as a bare minimum, to make sure your properties are legal. This is so you don't get in trouble with the authorities, you don't get heavy fines, and very important, to make sure your properties are legal for your tenant. So make sure they're safe. Make sure you've got your gas cert in place, your electrical cert in place, smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, EPC certs. There's loads of different things you need to make sure your properties are legal. But if you're struggling, if you're not quite sure, get a copy of the How to Rent guide, and all of the things you need to make sure your properties are legal are in the How to Rent guide. Now, if you look at the video description below, there's a link for the How to Rent guide. It's very useful for landlords and tenants. So have a look and make sure your properties are legal. It's so important. Make sure your properties are legal for your tenant's sake and for your own sake. Managing your property. Now, if I was starting out, I would do it yourself for the first 1 or 2 properties. And this is like a little landlord apprenticeship, if you like. You get to know how to be a landlord through experience. You can do it by yourself, then you'll arrange for all the maintenance work, you'll get to speak to your tenants, you'll understand your tenants' needs. And going back to my last point, the How to Rent guide, if you're going to manage your properties, I would have a good read of the How to Rent guide so you know exactly what is required of you as a landlord. And you know that if your tenant is asking for too much, you know what you're obliged to do as a landlord. And you can even give your tenant a copy of the How to Rent guide, so they fully understand what your responsibilities are as a landlord and what they should expect from you. So I've done this for many years. I managed the properties myself. As I've touched on, I made some mistakes, but eventually I got to a point where I'm a decent landlord in my opinion. But as time goes on and I build my portfolio, I want to get to a point where I have X amount of properties and I want them all managed by a letting agent. So it's more passive, less for me to do, and I'm happy to pay that 10% fee for the letting agent to manage the properties. Now I do it with 1 property at the moment. I've given it to a letting agent to manage, and over the last 12 months they've been excellent. So I think it's something I'm definitely going to transition to over the next few years. I will eventually move all my properties from managing them myself to a letting agent. So it's your choice, manage them yourself or use a letting agent. But again, if you're just starting out, I honestly believe that it's a good idea to manage them yourself so you'll learn all about being a landlord. Start networking as soon as possible. This is far and away my biggest mistake to date as a property investor over the last 20 years. I've done it myself up until the last few years, and doing it by myself has led to average results. I've been an average landlord for far too long. I would say right up until the start of 2019, so that's like 3.5 years ago. So my first 17 years, I was an average landlord. And this isn't good enough. What you want to do is start off on the right footing. Get around other investors, and from what I've experienced over the last few years, they'll help you to up your game, up your level. You become a better landlord and a better property investor. Get around other investors who are more experienced, who are further on than you. So you might have a few properties, 1 or 2. Get around other investors who's got like 15, 20. They've got HMOs, or they do other strategies like service accommodation. They will help you. They'll help you see what's possible. I've met some property investors who are absolutely smashing it over the last few years, and it's made me see what's possible. So that's about it for today's video. If you've liked the video, give me a little like and subscribe to the channel if you like the content, and hopefully this helps you with your properties, especially if you're a beginner. It'll help you get into property investing. Start with single let maybe, and then move on to different strategies. What I want you to do if you are a beginner is get organized straight away. Take what I've said in this video, learn from my experience, get around other investors, make sure your properties are legal, and hopefully you become a successful property investor within a few short years. Thanks for listening.